I'm Dax from What's Under the Bed. Let's cut to the chase. Subscribe where the dog gets it. Oh, and also enjoy the interview. My guest today is Heather Langenkamp. She's an actor, writer, producer, and director who's appeared in more than 40 projects, including the hit sitcom Just the 10 of Us for 3 seasons on CBS. Most notably, she played the character Nancy Thompson in 3 movies from Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. She produced a wonderful documentary called I Am Nancy about her unique experience playing the iconic role. Heather, it's nice to meet you.
Great to meet you, Dax. No, you're Kai. You're Dax.
I'm Dax. Kai's my father.
That's right. Great to meet you.
I should also give a shout out to Janet Waddles for introducing us.
Yes, a dear friend.
You were born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma until around the 8th grade when your family moved to Washington, D.C. What was your childhood like in Tulsa?
I had a really fantastic childhood. Tulsa is a really great place to grow up. I went to public school at a school called Lee Elementary School, which was named after Robert E. Lee, and now they've changed the name to Council Oaks Elementary, which is happening all over the country, right? So I walked to school every day, and I had a lot of friends in my neighborhood. We played outside all the time. We built forts and trees that fell down, and we played tennis, we swam, we went to the lake a lot. And my dad actually, when I was in about 4th grade or 3rd grade, he bought a farm. So on the weekends, I would go with my dad to our farm, and I learned all about cows and taking care of cows, and learned to drive a tractor. So I had the best of both worlds. I had kind of a city life and this opportunity to spend a lot of time in the country as well, and met a lot of really incredible people as I was growing up.
Before the influence of movies, what scared you the most as a child? Like, was there a monster under the bed?
Well, I mean, I actually was always afraid of being home by myself alone. And back in those days, you know, it was pretty common to be left alone. You know what, your mom went to the grocery store, or, you know, even maybe not at night, but when I was about 9 or 10 and 11, that age, I would often be left home for an hour or two. And I often would get really scared and think that there were monsters under the bed, or people coming in and, you know, sneaking in through the window, and just had a, you know, that kind of imagination about strangers in the house. I think that was my first kind of real fear, is that someone was going to break in. But in general, I never really was that afraid of spiders, or I wasn't afraid of heights. So I don't feel like I had a lot of fears actually growing up.
Hansel and Gretel is a Grimm's fairy tale featured years later in your film New Nightmare. What children's story or fairy tale scared you the most when you were a kid?
Well, I really thought Hansel and Gretel is one of the scariest fairy tales. And I was incredibly excited that Wes used it in New Nightmare, because I'd always loved it. But I was a big fan, not only of fairy tales, but of Greek myths. And strangely, at my school, they had a unit for reading that was all about the Greek myths. And I think my favorite myth were the myths about the Minotaur that was inside the deep cave, and you know, every year they would sacrifice young people to go in and have to battle the Minotaur. And like all of those Greek myths, I thought they really, I don't know, excited my imagination. And so as I grew up, I kept reading more and more about Greek mythology, and studied Latin and did all sorts of things, because I just thought those myths and those stories were often not only really scary, but you know, really interesting. Like, I don't know, Prometheus being, you know, I think chained to the rock, and the ravens and the vultures eating out his guts. Like there's a lot of horror in the myths. And so I feel like it was a good start to my career.
I believe your childhood home was located about 5 minutes by car from Tulsa's infamous Hex House. It was here Carol Ann Smith kept 2 women as virtual slaves in her basement during World War II. Victims claimed she held them captive through witchcraft, spells, and incantations. The house was razed in 1975. Was the Hex House ever a subject of like ghost stories or Halloween traditions growing up?
I am embarrassed to say this is the first time I am ever hearing about the Hex House.
What?
I'll have to look it up. Maybe it was near my house. Oh my God, that's frightening. I was a very sheltered child. I don't know if anybody would have even told me about that if it was true. I mean, if anyone in my friend circle, I mean, there were a lot of houses that we did think were haunted, but no one ever told me about that story, believe it or not.
You played a witch in a play for a local museum when you were around 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah.
Do you remember the play?
I don't. I mean, it has in my memory. It's like kind of a mixture of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and some kind of witchy story too. I remember there were a lot of characters in the play, obviously, because they wanted, you know, every kid to be in it. But yeah, I don't remember the plot at all, but I know I was a witch. I do know that for a fact.
Did anyone film your performance, and would it still exist?
My family did not own a movie camera. So that's sad, right? But you know, that idea, you know, all through my childhood, we don't have any home movies or any motion pictures of my life. And it's kind of nice that way. I mean, I can't go back and get embarrassed by what I did as a child, but on the other hand, the only representative, you know, images I have are stills. And, you know, even then my family wasn't big photo takers.
You mentioned earlier that you would visit your father's farm on weekends. Who was Big Red?
Big Red was our bull. Well, every couple of years or 4 or 5 years, you'd get a new bull. And Big Red was one of my favorite animals. He was really, you know, handsome. Yeah, on our farm, we had a bull named Big Red. We had other ones too, but I just remember Big Red the most because he probably was one of the first animals that I kind of watched really closely. And you know, we had very few cows, but so you have one bull and about 10 other cows. And so he's kind of like the dad of the whole group. And I don't know, I just got attached to him. And so when we finally, you know, was rotating him out, I remember being very kind of affected by that. I'm feeling really sad about that.
Tim Blake Nelson is an amazing actor who's been in movies like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Did you know each other as kids?
As a matter of fact, our families belonged to a small kind of a swimming club in the neighborhood that was where we went every day of the summer. We would just go swimming there, and they had some tennis courts where we played tennis, and it was a place where a lot of us gathered. And yeah, Tim was my age. He was in my class, and we did go to school together at a junior high called Holland Hall, and then I moved to Washington D.C. when I was going into 9th grade. So after that, didn't see much of him, but I did see him from time to time. He and his friends, they were, you know, kind of the most intelligent and hilarious of the kids at that school. And so whenever I was back in town, it was always a pleasure to see them. And, you know, I've seen him, you know, on and off. His mom was actually my Latin teacher and my tennis coach when I was in junior high. So we've known their family for quite a long time. And their family is one of the most kind of philanthropic and really generous families of Oklahoma and across America. So getting to know Tim was kind of, I had no idea about what a great actor he was going to become, but he certainly had a huge personality and really amazing sense of humor, and always seemed to me to be one of like the smartest people in the room.
Who was Mosslyn Larkin?
So Mosslyn Larkin, so I was, I was dying to take ballet when I was a little girl. When I was in kindergarten, I pretty much begged my mom to take ballet. And Mosslyn Larkin was a woman who, along with her husband, Roman Jasinski, owned a small ballet school in Tulsa called Tulsa School of Ballet. And they both had been dancers with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, which is a world famous ballet troupe that traveled all over Europe in the 30s and 40s. And Mosslyn Larkin was one of the ballerinas in the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, and then had decided to move back to Oklahoma, where she was raised, to open her ballet school. So she was not only a fantastic teacher of ballet, she was also just a really amazing mentor for a young person. She really taught me a lot of discipline, and she had just a really warm and loving manner. And so I really hung out a lot there as I was growing up. And I was really sorry to leave Tulsa. One of the reasons was because of her. And then she continued teaching for many, many, many years. And now her son, Roman Jasinski Jr., he actually operates that school. But it was a really wonderful school with a ballet company, and ballet is a very difficult, now you almost call it a sport. It's so difficult, and you have to really be a very disciplined person to learn all the steps and you go quite often. Like I went every day to ballet for a while. So yeah, I just really loved it. And I find that all that experience that I got doing ballet made me really comfortable on the set working. Are you back? So when I finally became, an actor, I found that all that ballet training really helped me, because Wes had me do like a lot of moving, not just walking, but, a lot of running, a lot of fighting, a lot of, creeping around. And I found that a lot of the times I would think about it as if I were doing a dance or a step. And, the same way you memorize the kinds of steps you do for a ballet, it was very similar the way I would memorize the steps that I would do for Wes Craven's scenes with Robert, or, if he wanted me to creep along the street, I kind of created a little choreography that I could repeat over and over again without missing, a beat.
How much did your ballet training help you in 1988 when you performed your acrobatics routine for Circus of the Stars on CBS?
Oh, I would never have been able to do Circus of the Stars unless I had had ballet training. Circus training is even harder than ballet training, because it's super painful, because you fall a lot. Ballet, and if you're really clumsy, you're falling down, but otherwise you're pretty much on your feet. Circus performing, you're constantly slamming down on the ground, and you're just punishing your ankles and your knees. I did the teeter board, which, unless you are really know what you're doing, you often send just massive amounts of pressure into your ankles and your knees. So there was about 2 or 3 weeks that I just could barely walk after training, and then you get better and better, and it was bearable after a while. But yeah, I was pretty much in pain the entire time that we did that show. It was super fun though, and I was a little bit disappointed in the beginning that I was doing teeter board, because I didn't really know what kind of tricks were going to be involved with that, because everyone wants to do the trapeze, because the trapeze is like the most glamorous and it's the most difficult, and you're flying, and of course it looks like the most fun. So when I watched the actual trapeze artists learning their routines, I was really happy that I had stuck with the teeter board, because I felt like our tricks were really fun, and they were, pretty flashy tricks. In fact, the funny thing is that Brian Austin Green actually lives in Malibu, and I see him all the time, and I keep wanting to stop him and say, remember us? We did our teeter board routine together. I haven't had a chance to do that yet.
Your father was an attorney when he went to work for President Carter's administration, which you mentioned earlier. You moved to DC in Washington D.C. for high school.
Yeah.
You mentioned that earlier. Was this a scary move for you, or something you were excited for?
Well, I mean, when you're in 8th grade, I mean, the idea of going to a new school and having to meet new people, it was really scary. It's just tough to make a life change like that, no matter where you're going. But Washington D.C. was such a different kind of place than Oklahoma. So actually, the first thing that I really noticed is that people in Washington D.C. who I was meeting didn't really know even anything about Oklahoma. Like, I felt that a lot of people who call the middle of the country the flyover zone, I really felt that. Like, I just felt that people didn't take much of an interest in the places that, I knew very well. And at first it was a little bit annoying because I think the folks on the East and West Coast sometimes discount the people in the middle of the country as like having anything like exciting going on in their lives, or, they just think that everything in the middle is just boring and and not as sophisticated. But so I got there and I had to kind of prove that, I was just as, worthy of friendship as anybody, and I felt like it took a long time to work at finding friends. But once I found my friends, I really started to love Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful city. It's really interesting. There's never a dull moment. Even if you don't have anything to do, you could just go down to the mall and walk around, or you could go to a free museum. All the museums are free. And it was just a place where there was a lot of culture and just a ton of stuff happening all the time. And I became very involved in my high school, and, I learned to love it. And by the time I loved it, then my family moved away back to Oklahoma. So it was the way it always is for kids who move around.
In high school, you were on the tennis team. You were an editor for the school paper. You were a member of the drama club, the service board for the dance committee, on the academic team, and government club. Notably, you were the vice president of student government and planning. Can you tell me who the president was?
So the student body president was Susan Rice, who was a really good friend, and she was also the sports editor of the newspaper, and she ended up becoming not only the ambassador to the United Nations, but then the national security advisor to Obama. And she was one of Obama's biggest fans in the very early days of his candidacy. And I always thought that she was so committed to seeing him win, and also, being such an important advisor to him. So she's actually now working in the Biden administration as well. And so she's always been in government since we actually went to college together, and we were college roommates for a short while as well.
Was Heathcliff, Heath, Miffy, or Lang ever nicknames anyone called you in school?
Maybe. I had so many names because Langenkamp kind of inspires people to make all sorts of nicknames. But Labor Camp was one of my favorite ones because, I was always like, I don't know why, but I was always like a really, really hard worker. And people, whenever they had things that they wanted me to, people to do, they would always look at me to do them. So it's a terrible name to have, actually, but yeah, Miffy, that was one, because one day I said in English class that I was really miffed that something had happened. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't probably very serious. But I'm like, I'm really miffed. And so from that day on, of course, I was Miffy. Yeah. Who did you interview to find that one out? Oh my God.
You graduated from school and you're back in Oklahoma working as a copy clerk for Tulsa Tribune between March and September 1982. During this time, Francis Ford Coppola is in Tulsa filming his two movies, The Outsiders and Rumblefish, back to back. They're filming in places like the Admiral Twin Drive-In and in Crutchfield Park. There was an ad in the paper calling for extras. Can you tell me what happened with you and your friend Lisa?
Yes, so I saw the ad for extras, and I went down to the casting office and turned in a photo. I think we all took Polaroid pictures back then, and just turned it in and said, I'd really like to be, in The Outsiders. And Janet Hershenson, who was the casting director, she's like, oh, well, why don't you read a couple of pages here for me, and maybe we'll have a small part for you. We're auditioning for some young girls who are in a scene. And so I said, great. So I read for that part. I don't remember what part it was, but I didn't get it. Too bad. And I went home and was a little bit dejected, but we still got to be in the extra big day of extras when it's the final day of school and The Outsiders, and all the kids are coming rushing out of the school there. And so I got to be in that scene, and I think I made like $31, and it was really exciting. And of course, we were all very excited that this movie was being made in Tulsa, and all these like really cute guys were around everywhere, and actors from Hollywood. It was very exciting. So a few weeks went by, and I got a call from my friend Lisa, who said, I've gotten a call to go be in their next movie, which is called Rumblefish, but it's a night shoot, and my mom doesn't want me to go down there by myself. And would you, maybe I could call them and see if you could come along. And this is the way I remember it. And so Lisa called the casting director and said, can I bring Heather Langenkamp? And they were like, yeah, sure. So we went down there together, and it was a big wedding scene that was a nighttime scene, and lots of people on the street. And that night, I had a chance to get a line in the film, and it was just a one line, kind of a, hey guys, come up to the wedding, kind of throwaway line, really. But from that opportunity, I got my SAG card, and I owe it all to my friend Lisa.
You went to college at Stanford University to study Russian with hopes to become a foreign service officer or diplomat. Can you speak anything in Russian?
Да. Я люблю говорить по-русски. No, that's all I know. That I like to speak in Russian, but I don't know much anymore. I can probably say, я вас люблю, which means I love you, which is like the one thing I really love to say.
Yeah, I didn't understand a single word he just said. You just mentioned Janet Hershenson. What role did she play, and what came next for you?
Well, I mean, she just really did so many things for me. At that time, I was about to go to Stanford, and I didn't really have any connections in Los Angeles, but she really offered to introduce me to some agents, and she offered to let me stay at her house for a few weeks while I auditioned for roles. And she and her husband were so kind to me, and were very just open their lives to me really for quite a while. And from there, from her, I was able to sign an agent and start to go on a lot more auditions. And from Stanford, I would sometimes I would drive, but most of the time I would fly to Los Angeles if there was an audition worth going to. And that was the days when the first Macintosh computers came out. I mean, they were called Macintoshes, and I would go on the plane with this like very large bag with my new Macintosh computer, and I'd fly to LA, and then I would do my homework on my Macintosh computer, and then it had a giant bag, and then I would fly back to Stanford and go to school. And I really it was a tough time because I never was able to feel like I was 100% doing my studies or 100% pursuing my acting career. It was always like a mixture of both. And so luckily, Stanford was a place where if I did get a job, they would let me, excuse myself from a quarter or two and then re-enroll. They had you could stop out, they called it. So I took advantage of that as much as possible. And I probably stopped out, 8 or 10 times. Finally graduated when I was 24 years old, maybe, quite a ways after, I intended to graduate.
Can you tell me what a car accident had to do with landing your first role in the movie Nickel Mountain?
Oh, that was so I had, like I said, flew down to Los Angeles, and not many car rental agencies would rent to a person who was only 18 years old. I mean, it's the same way today. You can barely find anyone to rent a car to someone that age. So I had found a car rental agency. It was called, oh God, I wish I could remember the name of it. It was just a really down low car rental agency. Anyway, I found this car and I drove it to the audition, and it was for Barbara Clayman, who's a famous casting director for a low budget movie called Nickel Mountain. And I go there and I kind of have to wait a long time because I think we were waiting for the director to arrive, or I had done the first audition and then they said, well, can you wait another hour? And then, we're going to have the director come. But anyway, it seemed like I was there for quite a while. And then when I left to go get my, go home and go back to the airport, the car that I had rented was completely demolished. Like a runaway vehicle had come down the hill at full speed and just smashed into my rent-a-car. So at that point, I realized I'm not going to get to the airport, and I have to go through a lot of trouble to go get the tow truck. And anyway, Barbara Clayman and the director of Nickel Mountain, Drew Denbaum, like they kind of watched me handle this entire real nightmare, pain in the neck situation. And we got along great. We kind of became friends over this horrible situation. And I ended up staying in Los Angeles that night and found out that I got the part. Like they had decided that whatever plucky, can-do spirit that I had that day, getting my car arranged and figured out, I guess they liked that part of me, and they hired me for that role.
You've given so many great interviews about A Nightmare on Elm Street, so I will only touch on it briefly here. There's so much more I want to get to. You've described A Nightmare on Elm Street as teen noir. Can you explain what that means?
Well, at the time of the 80s, when we were, when I was a late teenager and early 20s, Hollywood was just filled with these movies about teenagers. It was just the height of John Hughes's films, and all the movies that I wanted to be in at the time were The Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink, and all of these John Hughes movies and Adventures in Babysitting. And so these teen movies really took over America at this time, and the Brat Pack was, just soaring in popularity, and all the teen magazines. Back then, you can't even imagine how many magazines were just devoted to teenage pop culture and Teen Beat and everything. It's everywhere you went. That was what stood in for all the social media and everything that we have today. It was really the precursor to all of that kind of 24/7 fandom that we all are so familiar with right now. So Nightmare on Elm Street was just so different. I didn't really know what I was getting into when I said yes to that film. But now it took a lot of the elements of those teen movies, the teen angst, the teen, storylines, but actually brought it into this very dark place and what we call horror. Back then they might have even called slasher. And so it kind of mixed these genres, I felt, pretty well, and actually maybe the best it's ever been mixed together. So that's what I mean, I think, when I say teen noir.
The way high school is represented in films like Nightmare on Elm Street seems like a simpler time in many ways. Now kids are dealing with bullies, COVID isolation, and active shooter drills. Do you think horror movies can provide some catharsis for kids dealing with these real-life horrors?
I totally think that people use horror to deal with the real horror that's going on in their lives. Though, as real life situations get more and more deadly for teenagers, I find that horror has a harder time incorporating them into films without being just almost too much. So like you said, I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street, our human relationships are not as nearly as, you know, dire as what I see a lot of teenagers going through right now. Like Nancy's parents are getting divorced, you know. A lot of people would say, you know, big whoop, that happens like every day here now. But back then in the 80s, it was still quite a phenomenon to see in the late 70s and early 80s how many families were going through divorce. So that was like a big social issue at the time. Bullying, of course, wasn't a big issue yet, though it was being done literally every single day to kids. It just wasn't verbalized, and you know, it didn't become a hot button issue. But even in Nightmare on Elm Street, you can see it a little bit where, you know, I think that Rod's character is a little bit of a bully, obviously, and he's obviously, you know, kind of not a kind of guy that we all, you know, dream about having in our lives. So those issues are there. You know, the police, like the ineffectual, I don't know, that feeling that you have that the police just aren't there for you. Like that's definitely a small issue in Nightmare on Elm Street. But now 30, 40 years later, of course, how we deal with police in our lives is like a huge issue, big touchstone for America. So it was kind of maybe the baby steps of some of these issues. And yeah, it makes me really sad and upset to see the awful, awful things that teenagers today have to deal with in high school. Not only, like you said, the active shooter drills, the fear just of having to deal with an active shooter is just as bad as the active shooter, it seems like in some cases. So we've been having a lot of those things happening here in California, and I just, yeah, I don't know what kind of movie could help you through those kinds of things. I just don't know.
Wes Craven is one of my favorite filmmakers. He passed away sadly in 2015. Since I can't interview him, I hope to collect stories as I interview people who knew him. This way I can gather these stories in one place and have them in lieu of an interview. Is there a story you'd like to share?
God, there's so many. He was such a interesting and really neat person. Gosh, let me think about it for a second. Well, the only thing I can say that it really always it makes me laugh, because people always think that he's, he's perfect in some ways. I mean, he wasn't a perfect man in any sense of the word, but he would often write things, and I was trying to approach my character from a very realistic point of view. Like, I want to make her as real as possible. I don't want her to be unrecognizable from just an average teenager, or her reality needs to be the same reality that a kid could recognize. And so I would often go up to Wes and say, how am I supposed to do this? Like, how am I supposed to, pretend that I'm going to sleep in the bathtub, and then, just like that whole bathtub scene, like I could really hardly get my mind around what he was trying to create. And I didn't have the benefit of being in his imagination, right? So I'm just like, this is so dumb, what is going to happen? And he would always just look at me and just say, Heather, it's a dream. It's just a dream. Anything can happen. And I'm like, yeah, but I want it to be realistic. I want it to be real. I don't want people to think I'm just like making things up. And he's like, we can get away with a lot. We have a lot of leeway because this is a dream. And he must have said that to me, like, I don't know, dozens of times, because when I tried to anchor everything into this firm reality, he always wanted to let me know that the audience was going to go along with us because we were in a dream. And you have to always remember that's his license as the director to take us to a different reality. And so that was kind of the way that we butt heads, and I would insist on it being as real as possible. And then he would always bring in all this fantasy that, was just so mind-boggling. And I think one of the reasons that the movie is successful is because there was kind of this perfect marriage of those two things. So it's so real, but yet it's so fantastic at the same time.
It's been said a hero is only as good as their villain. I would say that also the opposite is true. A villain is only as good as the hero they're up against. I'm a fan of the Elm Street franchise, but whenever Nancy isn't there, it's the Freddy show. There's nothing special whenever Nancy, I'm sorry, there's something special. I meant nothing special whenever Nancy and Freddy aren't.
Yeah.
There's something special whenever Nancy and Freddy go head to head. There's real chemistry between the two. She lifts him up, and it's always the best version of Freddy when Nancy is there.
Well, that's such a huge compliment. I mean, I think that we definitely had chemistry, Robert and I. I think that we really enjoyed to, engage each other in all the different ways that it's possible to do that on film. And Robert was very challenging, that he didn't want it just to be kind of this boring, just spooky guy in the corner, or lurking man over on the side of the road. And he didn't want to be lurking, menace. And instead he wanted to be like this active, really, really scary person who was going to, dig his finger knives into you. And that takes a lot of action. And so planning that action and getting the blocking for that action and getting the stunt coordinator to help us make that action. We both really wanted to do it as much as possible. And so I think that is one of the things you see in our chemistry, is that it's very physical. We're not afraid of clashing, in combat. And I think that's why people love Nancy so much.
You come from a family who thought becoming a Supreme Court justice or joining the Peace Corps was a noble pursuit. Were they proud when A Nightmare on Elm Street was entered into the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress?
I think the first person who let me know that had happened was my mom, who sent me the notice that was in the Washington Post, and she was thrilled. So she's definitely my biggest fan in that when that happened. And I think my parents were very proud of me for being so certain about what I wanted to do and making this pathway in my life, which was, certainly really tough, no matter who you are. And, there were times that were very hard, and other times things were going well, but, my career was very up and down, very up and down. So I think they just respected the fact that I was willing to endure that. Whereas other folks that I knew and friends, they had much more straight career paths and knew what they wanted. And it seemed like their paths were just like a little bit more socially acceptable in some ways, even though that sounds funny because everybody wants to be an actor. But it's one thing to say you want to be one, and then it's another thing to actually okay, you don't have enough money to pay for your car payment. Okay, you have to call and borrow money, or you have to sell your car. Like all those decisions that you make when you decide to be an artist are tough. And I think a lot of parents, they just don't want to see their kids struggle that much, and they just want it to be easier, and they'd rather they have a steady job, or not travel around so much, or they just want them to be put in one place. And those are all really great desires, and I can totally get it because I'm a parent too. But it's hard to watch your kids struggle, and whether it's financially struggle, or they're struggling because they're not getting what they want, or like if you get a lot of rejections in a row, it's, as a parent, it's really tough to watch your kid go through that. And so I think that's the hard part with parents and artists of any kind, is that they have to be okay watching you struggle.
Nancy Thompson is known for being wholesome and good. You were able to play a troubled bad girl named Paula Finkel in an after-school special called Can a Guy Say No?, based on the novel, a very touchy subject. You also appeared in the music video for ZZ Top's song Sleeping Bag. Are there any fun stories about any of these projects?
Oh, well, I mean, the ZZ Top, oh my gosh, that was such a thrill to be in a ZZ Top video. And we went into the mountains to shoot that. We went into to Big Bear, which is just outside of Los Angeles. And I remember I hadn't been home in a long time. And it was the first time like I had seen stars in a really long time. And out there, you know, at the top of the mountain, everyone was just shocked at all the stars. And it made me really homesick. I remember being up there, and you just realize like LA is just such a big city. And back then the pollution was just terrible. I mean, the air quality was just brown and smog alerts all the time. And you would stay inside, and every morning your windowsill would have soot on it, even if you had dusted it the night before. So I remember, I mean, that sounds like a stupid story, but I just remember it reconnected me with the idea of, oh gosh, I need to get back out into nature a little bit more. But also in that ZZ Top video, I mean, the truck, Bigfoot, was definitely the star. Like the truck had like 5 people taking care of it, and it was getting, you know, all this star treatment. And meanwhile, we were just kind of like huddling in the little trailers waiting for our, you know, waiting for the call that we had to work. But it was just so much fun to work on a music video. At the very beginning of music videos, I mean, MTV hadn't been around for that long. I mean, maybe 5 years, but yeah, it was kind of a cutting edge thing to be in a music video. What was the other show? Oh, well, I mean, the idea that Can a Guy Say No? I mean, that was the very first directorial effort of Thomas Schlamme, who went on to direct all the West Wings, and he's just an incredible director and a very important person in Hollywood. So the idea that I got to be in his first project, I always think is really kind of thrilling. But yeah, I mean, of course, that I got to play a bad girl, Paula Finkel, but yeah, she's by today's standards, she just seems really normal to me.
Marianne Madalena was Wes Craven's producing partner and the person who discovered the ghost face mask featured in the Scream franchise while on a location scout. How did her invitation to a rap party change your life?
Yes, well, Marianne worked on a Wes Craven film called Serpent and the Rainbow. It was one of the first films that she worked with Wes on before she became his, you know, quote, producer. And I think that was probably maybe the first job that they actually had a partnership on. But she and one of the casting assistants to Janet Hershenson, they both were in Haiti with Wes Craven. And there was a gentleman on that shoot who was a makeup artist who did all the special effects makeup, named David Anderson. And when they came back from Haiti, they said, you know what, I think we want you to meet David Anderson. And so at the rap party for Serpent and the Rainbow, they invited me, and I got to meet David Leroy Anderson. And that is the man that I married and have been married to for 32 years now.
Would you share the story of David's proposal?
Oh, okay. So it was fall of 1989, no, or 1988, I can't remember. But he was shooting Pet Cemetery in Maine, in Ellsworth, Maine. And I remember it was beginning of September, and I said, well, you know, I have some time off, why don't I come and visit you in Ellsworth, Maine? And so I flew to Ellsworth, and we, you know, it was a tiny little town. they were shooting some really interesting scenes at Pet Cemetery. It was the scene where the house catches on fire, and then a lot of the scenes where Fred Gwynn is on the porch, and that infernal like tanker is speeding down the road. And so I got to see a lot of days of shooting, which was really exciting. And then there was a weekend off, and David proposed to me on our way to Acadia National Park. But he wanted to propose to me in the park, but he just couldn't wait. So he proposed to me the night before, and it was very romantic, and I said yes.
Aw. You played the role of the pious sister Marie Lubbock for 3 seasons on the sitcom Just the 10 of Us. The show was a spinoff from the hit Growing Pains. 2 other actresses on the show appear in the Elm Street franchise, and there are references to the movie throughout the series. Your character, along with 3 of her sisters, form a singing group called the Lubbock Babes and sing songs like Born to Be Wild, Dancing in the Streets, and you sing a sultry rendition of Unchain My Heart. I have a question I like to ask my guests who sing or play instruments. Do you think more songs have been written about love, lust, or heartbreak?
Ooh. Heartbreak. I think more songs are written about heartbreak. Because there's something about heartbreak, and every artist I know who writes songs, and my daughter's a songwriter, that you're really inspired to sit down and write about your pain. When you're in love, you're so excited about being in love, you don't take the time sometimes to write about it. But when you're heartbroken and the person's out of your life, or you don't know how to get them back, you have a lot of extra time on your hands. So you write songs about being heartbroken.
What is the origin of Marie's crazy dance moves?
Well, I have to say, gosh, I mean, those are all me. I mean, I'm a little bit nerdy on the inside, and I could just totally get funky as Marie with no problem. Though I was very inspired by Julia Louis-Dreyfus's moves as oh gosh, what's her name on Seinfeld?
Elaine.
Yeah,
Elaine.
I was very inspired by Elaine's moves at times, and she kind of had some funky Marie-esque kinds of dance moves as well.
Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead is your first project you worked on with your husband. Do you prefer fast zombies or slow zombies?
Fast zombies all the way. And in fact, Zack Snyder was really the first to kind of get into fast zombies, like make that a thing. Of course, 28 Days Later, they had some fast zombies, but Zack really made it the whole mission of his movie to have really cool, like that really realistic zombies that move fast.
You're repeatedly asked what it's like to work with Robert Englund. What I want to know has it always been easy working alongside your husband?
It's not always easy, I have to say. Sometimes it's really hard. Because my problem is that I stick my nose into things that I shouldn't. Like, I am not the special effects makeup artist. I am the person who is kind of managing the whole business. And so my creative ideas aren't that important in this venue. And so sometimes I give my opinion where it's not wanted. And I think that causes the most strife. Like, even though, he's pretty good about taking my comments, sometimes, I think he thinks that I should just butt out and mind my own business.
You've been a part of many documentaries, but your labor of love is I Am Nancy. You have given many great interviews about it, so I will only touch on it briefly. Where can people watch it, and is there any chance of a sequel?
So you can watch it. You can stream it on Vimeo. You can stream it on Vimeo, and you can also buy it I have it for sale at every kind of convention that I go to. I usually will have copies. I also sell it on my website, which is iamnancy.info, and you can go there and you can buy a copy on my website, which I sell some signed autographs there too. And I usually give fans an idea of where I'm going to be, you know, with personal appearances and stuff. So that's a good place to go and find things that I'm doing. But yeah, it's you know, it's something that I've wanted to get on a streaming platform. I would like to get it up on Shudder or, you know, Netflix or something so that more people can see it. That would be a goal of mine.
Who are Sandy Bottoms and Carl Reeves?
So here in Malibu, we have the world's, I mean, not the world's, the United States smallest FM radio station here in Malibu. It's KBUU 99.1. And my good friend, Hans Letz, he has been the director of this station for 6 years now. And when he first started up the station, it was really to provide Malibu with an FM station that could help during fires and things, because as you might not know, I mean, when the electricity goes down, there's really no way to get information, especially local news. And he set up an all solar radio station now, so that in the event of a fire, like this radio station in theory is going to be able to get out information all across our area and our very mountainous area. So I was really excited about that proposition. And I also always wanted to be a DJ. So the funny thing is that I don't really care that much about music per se. I like all music. I'll listen to anything. So I don't have like a lot of opinions about what's the best music or anything. So I told Hans that I would like to be a DJ, but I wanted to have a pseudonym. And so my pseudonym is Sandy Bottoms. And my good friend Carl Reef is, of course, David Anderson. And so I have a show every Saturday where I talk about all the things that are happening in the fair city of Malibu, California.
I am a really big fan of James A. Janice and Dead Meat. I'd love to interview him one day. How did you become the only ordained minister from the Universal Life Church who's battled Freddy Krueger 3 times and officiated the wedding of James and Chelsea?
I know, I that was such an honor. Gosh, I mean, they all happened, yeah, in very different parts of my life. So I have to say, I decided to become an ordained minister because of them. They first asked me to officiate their wedding, and then they told me how I was going to do it. So the Universal Life Church allows almost pretty much anybody to become a minister. And I recommend anyone who has friends or relatives that want to be married by you can go ahead and get your credentials. And then the hard part is actually creating the ceremony for the people that, you know, have asked you to do this really important event in their lives. And I was so nervous. I really wanted it to be special for them because they'd been waiting a very long time to get married because of the pandemic. They were waiting, you know, several years. And it actually turned out that they had waited 10 years to even get married after getting, you know, meeting each other. And so it was a long time coming, this wedding. And I felt that my responsibility to do a good sermon and a delightful kind of presentation of their just their lives together, that was my mission, and I hope I accomplished it.
You and your husband run AFX Studio. It's an award-winning special effects makeup company responsible for some of the greatest creature and makeup effects over the past 30 years. This last question is a Sophie's Choice. 2 must die so 1 may live. Twisty the Clown from American Horror Story, Red Devil from Scream Queens, or the Mermaid from Cabin in the Woods.
Oh, Merman,
not
yeah.
Mermaid, Merman.
So one has to die, or all of them?
2 has to die, so 1 gets to live.
Twisty gets to live. Yeah, he's gonna go down as like one of the best clowns ever, I think. Scary clowns. Though I have to say, Merman is just such a sweet, lovable, scary, you know, scary he's not scary. He's not even a monster. He's like a sad merman who has a bloody blowhole. Yeah.
Ah, yes, the bloody blowhole.
That was I invented that moniker for that thing.
Thank you for sitting down with me. Is there anything you want to ask me before we were done?
Well, no, I think you're conducted probably the best interview that I've ever sat for, and your depth of research and your delightful questions have really been a pleasure. And I wish I had been more prepared with notes. My memory as I get older, you can't just grasp onto things like immediately like you used to, but now you've brought this whole thing about my own past into full color, and I love it. Thank you so much.
Is there anywhere like where people can find you?
Well, like I said, my website, iamnancy.info, is where I try to give people an idea of some of the things I've been doing. Like, you didn't mention my short film called Washed Away. So you can see that. There's a link on my website to go see the short film that I did. Did you know about the short film that I made?
I did. I completely missed it.
Well, that's next. Our next interview can talk about that. So that's there as well. And then some people really enjoyed the song from I Am Nancy on my DVD. I think you can listen to the song on there. So yeah, there's a lot. That's where you can mostly find me. You can also find me all over the country at different conventions. I'm going to be, and personal appearances. I'm going to be in Dallas this weekend, and then I'm going to be in Orlando in June, and then I'm going to be in Chicago in August. So people all over the country, if they're near any of those cities, they can certainly come and say hi.
I also have recently found that you have a new Netflix series with Mike Flanagan.
Oh, I'd love to mention that if you don't mind.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
So yeah, Mike Flanagan, who is a big Nightmare on Elm Street and Wes Craven fan, he called me a year and a half ago now, like January 2021, and said, would you audition for a part in my new show? And I thought it would be a 1 episode thing, and I said sure. And so I auditioned for it, and it turns out that it was a series regular on his show called The Midnight Club, and it's a fantastic show. It's about a group of teenagers who have terminal cancer, based on the books The Midnight Club by Christopher Pike. And my character owns the hospice that takes care of all of these kids as they transition into, hospice care is really heavy. I mean, it's the kind of care you get when you know your illness is terminal. And so all these kids know that they're terminally ill, and they come to this hospice because they want to live life in a kind of a different way. And they want to have more freedom. They don't want to be hooked up to machines. They don't want to have, really invasive medical care. And so that's my character, bringing that to them. And then at midnight, they tell really scary stories. And so at midnight, when they tell the scary stories, all of us act out these stories, in movie land. So I get to play a lot of different characters. I get to play, I probably can't say, but I get to play a lot of different kinds of people. So that's coming out in October, I believe. So I'm hoping it's coming out very soon, this year.
I'm excited.
I hope you watch it. It's kind of made for people like in your age group. So I'm really curious what you would think.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I was astonished when I heard that I could interview you.
Well, I'm glad. I don't do that many interviews. In fact, I don't think I've done a Zoom interview in, forever. So I like to pick people who obviously are passionate about what they do and are you know, and obviously very intelligent people like you are. And Janet Waddles is a perfect, she said a lot of nice things about you. So you can thank her.